Welcome, my friend. The final hour approaches. The fate of Middle-earth hangs by a thread. As armies march and the shadow spreads, the bonds of courage, friendship, and hope will face their greatest trial. My name is Gandalf the White, and this is the story of the return of the king. Let us begin. Part 1, The War of the Ring. Chapter 1, Minas Tirith. Pippin rode with Gandalf upon Shadowfax through the darkening lands of Gondor. Fires burned upon the hills around them, beacons summoning allies to war. Sleepy and disoriented, Pippin barely grasped Gandalf's hurried words about the city they approached. At last they reached Minas Tirith, the White City. 7 tiers of gleaming stone crowned by a tower of silver and marble. Inside its walls the air was heavy with dread. When Pippin accidentally spoke of Boromir's death, Gandalf silenced him sharply. Such news must come first to Denethor, Boromir's father and the steward of Gondor. In the court of the fountain stood a lifeless white tree, its branches barren beneath the shadowed sky. Denethor sat before it, proud and cold, holding the cloven horn of Boromir. He questioned Pippin at length, drawing from him the tale of Boromir's fall. Moved by the man's valor, Pippin offered his service to Denethor in repayment of his debt. Gandalf watched in silence, wary of the steward's piercing mind. Later, in their quarters, Gandalf warned Pippin that Denethor sought more than comfort. He sought knowledge. The old lord had long studied the affairs of men and kings, and Gandalf suspected he knew more of Aragorn than he revealed. Pippin was placed under the care of Beregond, a kindly soldier who taught him the ways of the city's guard. Together they watched the growing storm over Mordor. Nazgul passed overhead, spreading fear wherever they flew, and far below, the beacons still burned, signals of desperation. As night fell, Gandalf paced restlessly, murmuring that dawn itself would soon be swallowed by darkness. Chapter 2, The Passing of the Grey Company. Far away, Merry rode with King Theoden toward Helm's Deep, heavy with worry for his missing friends. There they were met by a company of Dunedain, rangers of the north, led by Halbarad, and joined by Elladan and Elrohir, the sons of Elrond. They brought a grave message. Elrond had foreseen that Aragorn must take the paths of the dead if Gondor were to be saved. That night Aragorn withdrew in thought, and when morning came, his eyes were hard with resolve. He confessed that he had looked into the Palantir and revealed himself to Sauron. The Dark Lord now knew the heir of Isildur lived and would hasten his assault on Gondor. To answer this challenge, Aragorn chose the road through the haunted mountains where the spirits of Oathbreakers lingered, bound by ancient curse. Éowyn begged to go with him, but he refused her plea. She spoke of the cage that awaited her, honor without glory, duty without deeds, but Aragorn would not yield. At dawn, she stood in armor, silent as he rode away with Legolas, Gimli, and the Grey Company. Through darkness and fear they entered the paths of the dead, their torches flickering upon bones of long-forgotten kings. As they emerged into the cold air beyond, a host of shadowy forms followed. Beneath the black clouds, sent from Mordor, Aragorn called upon them at the Stone of Eric to fulfill their oath. The dead obeyed and fell in behind him, a silent army bound for war. Chapter 3, The Muster of Rohan. Theoden's riders left Helm's Deep and journeyed toward Edoras, passing beneath brooding skies and over ancient lands, marked by stone sentinels of forgotten peoples. In Dunharrow, Éowyn met them and told of Aragorn's departure through the paths of the dead. Theoden recalled the tale of Baldur, a prince who once vanished upon that cursed road, and he grieved for the fate of his friends. Soon after, a messenger from Gondor arrived bearing a red arrow, a plea for aid from Denethor. Theoden planned to gather his full host before marching, but the messenger warned that Minas Tirith would not stand so long. When the dawn came dim and colourless beneath the spreading shadow from the east, Theoden made his choice. He would ride swiftly with the riders he had, leaving the rest to follow when they could. He ordered Merry to remain behind, for his small pony could not endure the long ride. Heartbroken, Merry obeyed, until a mysterious rider named Dernhelm lifted him into the saddle and whispered that if his heart was true, he would not be left behind. Together they rode under the black sky toward the war that awaited them on the Pelennor. Chapter 4. The Siege of Gondor. Darkness without dawn fell upon Minas Tirith. Gandalf and Pippin watched as the shadow from Mordor spread across the plains. Denethor, proud and restless, summoned Pippin to sing for him, but his heart was too heavy for music. The steward spoke often of doom, and Gandalf saw that despair had already taken hold. At last Faramir returned from Ithilien, pursued by the winged Nazgul. Gandalf's light drove them off, and the wounded men were brought into the city. When Denethor saw his son, he rejoiced briefly, until Faramir told him that Frodo and Sam had journeyed into Mordor by way of Cirith Ungol. Denethor's joy turned to fury. Believing that the ring should have been sent to him, he accused Faramir of betrayal and weakness, praising Boromir in death, while scorning his living son. In wrath, he sent Faramir back to defend Osgiliath, knowing the task was hopeless. The next day, Pippin watched from the walls as the retreating soldiers fled across the Pelennor, the Nazgul circling above. Gandalf rode out to save them, but Faramir was struck by a poisoned dart and carried back to the city, near death. The hosts of Mordor encircled Minas Tirith. Siege engines hurled fire and stone. The lower circles burned, and the air filled with ash. Denethor's mind broke under grief. Declaring that all hope was lost, he ordered a pyre built for himself and his wounded son. Pippin fled to find Gandalf. At that very moment, the gates of the city thundered beneath the blows of a monstrous ram called Grond. The gates burst, and upon his black steed the Lord of the Nazgul rode in to face Gandalf. Just as their powers were set to clash, a rooster crowed in the silence, and beyond the walls came the clear, wild call of horns. The riders of Rohan had come at last, and dawn broke over the battlefield. Chapter 5. The Ride of the Rohirrim. Merry rode for days beside the silent rider called Dernhelm, hidden among the ranks of Rohan's host. The road ahead was blocked. Orcs had raised fortifications to halt any army from reaching Gondor. Merry felt small and powerless, wondering if he had made a grave mistake by joining a war far beyond his strength. Then hope came from an unexpected quarter. Theoden parleyed with the wild men who haunted the forests. Their chieftain, Gan-Buri-Gan, a gnarled and ancient being like the Pukul men carved in stone, offered to guide them through forgotten mountain paths in exchange for freedom from the darkness that plagued his people. Trusting his word, Theoden led his riders through the secret woods. The wild men's hidden roads carried them unseen past the enemy's lines until they emerged onto an overgrown stone way, an ancient road of Gondor, long lost to memory. The dark clouds that Sauron had sent now served to cloak their advance. At dawn, a change came. The wind turned, the clouds broke, and pale sunlight spilled across the plains. Theoden raised his sword, and with a cry that echoed through the hills, the riders of Rohan charged down upon the enemy. The orcs, caught unprepared, fell before the thunder of hooves and the horns of Rohan. The king's charge had begun. Chapter 6. The Battle of the Pelennor Fields. The battle spread like wildfire across the Pelennor. Theoden rode at the front, his golden shield gleaming in the dim light, but overhead the Lord of the Nazgul descended upon a monstrous winged beast. With a shriek it struck, killing Theoden's steed and casting both horse and rider to the ground. Dernhelm leapt between the fallen king and the dark creature. The Witch King laughed, proclaiming that no living man could hinder him. But the warrior cast aside helm and disguise, revealing herself to be Éowyn, daughter of kings. As the creature lunged, she struck its head from its shoulders, yet the Witch King turned his black mace upon her, breaking her arm and casting her down. At that moment, Merry, trembling and half forgotten in the chaos, crept behind the wraith and drove his sword into its leg. The blade, forged long ago to wound the servants of Mordor, struck true. Éowyn rose and drove her sword into the wraith's unseen face. With a scream that split the air, the Witch King vanished, leaving behind only his empty cloak. Merry found Theoden still alive but fading. The king blessed him and asked for Éomer, who came too late to hear his final words. Grief-stricken, Éomer discovered Éowyn lying motionless nearby and believed her dead. In a fury, he gathered the Rohirrim and led them once more into the fire of battle. When the corsair ships appeared upon the river, bearing black sails, all hope seemed lost. But as they drew near, a new banner flew from the mast, Aragorn's. From the ships came Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and the Dunedain, followed by the host of the dead. The tide turned, the enemies of Gondor fled or were slain, and the field was won. Chapter 7. The Pyre of Denethor. Within Minas Tirith, the battle's echoes reached even the high tombs of the city. Pippin, fearing for Faramir's life, sought Gandalf with desperate urgency. Denethor, overcome by madness and grief, had resolved to burn himself and his wounded son upon a funeral pyre. Gandalf and Pippin hastened to the tower. They found Beregond standing alone, defending the door to the tombs against Denethor's servants, who bore torches and oil. Inside, the steward stood beside Faramir's body, eyes wild and weary. He revealed the truth. He had looked into a palantir seeking knowledge of the enemy, and what he saw had driven him to despair. Denethor believed all hope lost, that Gondor would fall, and that Gandalf sought to supplant him with another king. Gandalf pleaded with him to abandon this madness, to trust in life and in his son's strength. But Denethor, consumed by pride and fear, seized a torch and set himself aflame. He perished upon the pyre, clutching the palantir, and his screams faded into the roar of fire. Gandalf carried Faramir to the houses of healing, where the healers labored to save him. Then, from beyond the walls, a cry split the air, a terrible wail that rose and then fell into silence. The Witch King was gone, destroyed upon the field. For the first time in many days, a faint glimmer of hope returned to Gondor. Chapter 8. The Houses of Healing. Merry wandered through the streets of Minas Tirith in a daze, following the procession that bore the wounded and the dead. The grief of the battle weighed upon him like a fog, and he felt as though part of him had withered. It was Pippin who found him at last, pale and trembling, and led him to the houses of healing. There, Gandalf saw that Merry's arm had grown cold and grey, poisoned by the touch of the Nazgul. Within the houses worked Ioreth, an aged woman wise in herb lore. She told Gandalf of a rhyme from the old days, that the hands of the king are the hands of a healer. Many lay stricken with despair, growing weak and chill, and only a healing power beyond mortal craft could save them. Outside the gates, Aragorn waited, unwilling to enter until the steward's leave was given. But Gandalf summoned him, and Aragorn came quietly into the city beneath the cloak of night. He called for Athelas, the herb of kings, though few believed it had virtue beyond its scent. Crushing the leaves in steaming water, he touched the brow of Faramir and called his name. The fragrance filled the room, fresh and clean as spring, and Faramir awoke, gazing with joy at the face of his king. Next, Aragorn turned to Éowyn. Her beauty was pale and still, and Gandalf whispered that her wound was deeper than the body, a sorrow born long before battle. When Éowyn knelt beside her, their voices together called her back. Her eyes opened, and she was herself again. Last came Merry, weak but smiling faintly. With the breath of Athelas upon him, colour returned to his cheeks, and soon he was sitting up, pipe in hand, as Pippin sat laughing beside him. Throughout the city whispers spread that the true king had returned, and that life had come again to Gondor. But before dawn, Aragorn slipped quietly away, returning to his camp outside the walls, unwilling to take the throne until the final test was won. Chapter 9. The Last Debate. In the days that followed, Legolas and Gimli entered Minas Tirith seeking their friends. Gimli marvelled at the stonework of the city, yet found fault in its finish, while Legolas mused that the race of men would outlast all others. For though they fall, they ever rise again. They found Merry and Pippin, and over food and laughter recounted their own strange journey through the paths of the dead, across the river where the seabirds cried, and aboard the captured corsair ships that had borne them to victory. Soon Gandalf gathered Aragorn, Éomer, and Prince Imrahil in council. He spoke plainly. No strength of arms could conquer Mordor. Victory could come only if the ring were destroyed. Their task now was to turn the eye of Sauron away from Frodo, to challenge the Dark Lord openly and draw out his fury. Aragorn agreed. They would march upon the Black Gate itself, not for conquest, but to buy a chance for the smallest hope that remained. The lords of Gondor and Rohan gave their consent. What remained of the West would ride against the darkness, a march not of victory, but of faith. Chapter 10. The Black Gate opens. The host of the West rode forth from Minas Tirith. Merry remained behind, his arm aching and his heart heavy, while Pippin rode among the captains of the king. Across the plains they journeyed, past the ruins of Osgiliath, and onto the crossroads, where they set right the fallen statue of the old king and cast down the red-eyed stone. Before the Black Gate of Mordor, the captains of the West stood together, Aragorn the king, Gandalf the White, Éomer of Rohan, Prince Imrahil, and the small figure of Peregrine took beside them. Aragorn called for Sauron to come forth and surrender. Instead, the great iron doors groaned open, and out rode the mouth of Sauron, a tall, twisted man robed in black, whose face was hidden save for a cruel, mocking mouth. He spoke with the voice of authority, showing them Frodo's mithril shirt, his cloak, and his sword belt. The sight struck despair into every heart, and for a moment even Gandalf's face grew grave. The mouth of Sauron offered terms. Surrender of all lands west of the Anduin, tribute to Mordor, and subjugation under a new lord in Isengard. But Gandalf's answer was silence, then fire. He cast away the false tokens and cried, "Begone! For your master shall soon be overthrown." With a roar, the armies of Mordor poured from the hills. Trolls charged from the marshes. Orcs swarmed from the rocks. The last battle began. Pippin fought beside Beregond until a great troll struck them down. Gathering his courage, Pippin drove his sword into the beast's neck before it fell upon him. As darkness closed over him, he heard a voice crying in the distance, "The eagles are coming." And in that final fading moment he thought of home and of Bilbo's stories told long ago beside the fire. Then all went still. Part 2. The Journey to Mount Doom. Chapter 11. The Tower of Cirith Ungol. Sam awoke beneath the shadow of the dark tower, bruised and alone. The doors had slammed shut behind Shagrat and Gorbag, trapping Frodo within. To save his master, Sam crept around the fortress to find another way in. He slipped on the ring to avoid detection, hearing distant shouts and the clamor of orcs fighting one another. When he removed the ring, the vastness of Mordor spread before him. Far off rose Mount Doom, its red glow flickering like a wound in the world. For a moment, the ring whispered its promise, power enough to make the desolation bloom, to turn waste into garden. But Samwise Gamgee, the plain hobbit of the Shire, turned away from the dream. Love and loyalty proved stronger than desire. At the gate of the tower, two vulture-like statues barred his way with invisible force. Raising the phial of Galadriel, Sam cried out in Elvish, and the light pierced the darkness. A bell rang out, and he entered, heart hammering. Within he found silence and death. The orcs had slaughtered each other in their greed for plunder. He followed the sound of harsh voices to a stairway where Shagrat searched for spoils. When Sam leapt forward with Sting, the terrified orc fled. Sam climbed the tower and, despairing, began to sing softly in the dark. The song drew an answering sound. An orc above, revealing a hidden trapdoor. Sam followed, cast the creature down, and burst into the upper chamber. There, naked and pale, lay Frodo. The hobbit stirred, wild-eyed and broken, believing their quest lost. But Sam knelt beside him and placed the ring in his hand. For a moment, madness flickered in Frodo's gaze. Suspicion and greed twisted his face. Then he mastered himself, whispering that Sam should not bear the burden any longer. They dressed in orc armor, though the weight of it crushed them, and crept toward the gate. Again, the Watcher's unseen power blocked the way, until Sam raised the phial once more. The light flared, the spell broke, and from above came the cry of a Nazgul, diving through the smoke. The chase through Mordor had begun. Chapter 12. The Land of Shadow. The two hobbits hid beneath the cliffs of the Morgai, while the Nazgul passed overhead. The air stank of ash and dust. They had no food but crumbs of lembas, and their water was gone. Frodo stumbled often, his strength failing. The ring had become a weight of iron upon his neck. They crept through thorns and over jagged rocks, hiding from patrols and scouts. Once, when despair pressed hardest, Sam lifted his head and saw a single star burning through the fumes of Mordor. Its cold light filled him with peace, a small, unshakable reminder that beauty still endured beyond the reach of evil. They found a foul stream and drank, though the taste was bitter. The nights passed without rest, and Frodo's will began to fade. He could no longer see the Shire in his mind, nor recall sunlight or green fields. The ring consumed his every thought. One evening, Sam glimpsed movement in the dark, Gollum following once more, but there was no strength to confront him. The hobbits pressed on, forced at last onto a road where Sauron's armies marched. Disguised in their stolen armor, they fell in among the ranks. Driven by whips, They stumbled onward until confusion broke out between two columns of orcs. Sam seized the moment, dragging Frodo away into the dust and shadow. The land ahead was dead and endless, and Frodo could scarcely crawl. Chapter 13. Mount Doom. They moved like ghosts across the ashen plain, the fiery mountain looming nearer with each step. Frodo grew weaker, his voice reduced to whispers. For 4 days they toiled under the red glow, resting only when they collapsed. At last, Sam knew they could not return. He cast aside his cooking gear and the few trinkets of home, keeping only Sting and the file. The ring had hollowed Frodo. His eyes burned with its fire, and he seemed scarcely mortal. Yet Sam would not leave him. When they reached the base of Mount Doom, Frodo could go no farther. Sam lifted him upon his back and began the climb. The fumes scorched his lungs, but he pressed on, step by step, until they came to a road that wound upward to a fiery fissure, the Crack of Doom. There, Gollum sprang upon them in madness and desperation. Frodo's voice rang out, commanding him to leave, and for a moment Sam saw Frodo shining with terrible power, the ring-bearer transformed into a figure of wrath and majesty. Gollum shrank away, and Frodo ran forward into the heart of the mountain. Sam followed and found him standing at the edge, trembling. Then Frodo turned, eyes blazing, and claimed the ring for himself. He vanished. In that instant, Sauron's eye wheeled toward Mount Doom, and the earth shuddered. Out of the shadows came Gollum, wrestling with the unseen Frodo. They struggled, biting and clawing, until Gollum seized Frodo's hand and bit off his finger. Crying out in triumph, he held the ring aloft, and dancing in wild joy, stepped too far. He fell into the fire. The ring, at last, was unmade. The mountain roared and split apart, rivers of flame bursting forth. The Nazgul flying toward the peak were caught in the eruption and burned to nothing. Outside, the hosts of Mordor faltered. Within the mountain, Frodo lay weak and trembling. Sam took his hand, and the two hobbits sat together amid the ruin and the rising smoke. Frodo smiled faintly. "I'm glad you're with me, Sam," he whispered. "Here, at the end of all things." And the firelight flickered around them as the world of shadow began to crumble. Chapter 14. The Field of Cormallen. At the Black Gate, Aragorn's army fought on the brink of ruin. Then the earth trembled and the sky flared with crimson light. The eagles swept down from the clouds, and the Nazgul turned in fear, fleeing toward the fire of Mount Doom. Gandalf lifted his staff and commanded the host to hold their ground, for the hour of judgment had come. At that very moment, deep within the mountain, the ring was unmade. The power of Sauron broke, and his great eye wavered and vanished. Across the plain, the armies of Mordor faltered. Orcs fled, shrieking, their minds emptied of purpose, while men who had fought under Sauron threw down their weapons and surrendered. The Dark Lord was gone. Far away, upon the slopes of Mount Doom, Frodo and Sam struggled from the ruin of the Crack of Doom. The mountain erupted behind them, and fire rained from the sky. They lay upon the rock, resigned to death. But the wind changed, and above the roar of the fire they heard the beating of great wings. Gandalf, borne by Gwaihir the Wind Lord, came with the eagles and lifted them from the flames. When Sam awoke, it was in sunlight and song. He found himself in a fair land of green trees and clear air, and beside him sat Gandalf, alive, radiant and smiling. Frodo, too, was there, healed and whole once more. Before long, they were led to a great gathering in Ithilien, where they beheld the king returned. Aragorn knelt before them and called them his saviors. Then, to the wonder of all, he set Frodo and Sam upon the throne, and all the host of Gondor and Rohan bowed and sang their praise. Many days of peace followed in Ithilien. Merry and Pippin told their tales of battle and triumph, taller now from the ent-draughts they had drunk. Sam listened, eyes wide, though he sighed to learn that no Oliphants had survived the war. At month's end, the army made ready to return to Minas Tirith, for the new age of men had begun. Chapter 15. The Steward and the King. In Minas Tirith, Éowyn lingered in the houses of healing, restless and sorrowful. Her arm still bound, she begged to be released, so that she might ride to war once more. The warden brought her instead to Faramir, now steward of Gondor, who spoke gently to her of patience and of peace. Together, they watched the eastern sky and waited for tidings. Days passed, and a strange bond grew between them, born of shared grief and courage. Faramir loved her quietly, though he knew her heart still yearned for the glory of battle and for the love of Aragorn. Then one morning, as they stood upon the walls, they both felt a sudden lightening in the air, the darkness lifting. The shadow had departed. Faramir turned to her and said, "No evil can endure forever." When word came of Frodo and Sam's triumph, the city rejoiced. J.R.R, the healer, told all who would listen that her prophecy had come true, for indeed the hands of the king are the hands of a healer. Yet Éowyn's joy was mingled with weariness. She realized that her hunger for renown had been born from despair, not purpose, and so, when Faramir confessed his love, she let go of her old dreams. She chose to become a healer, not a destroyer, and the two were betrothed. At last, Aragorn returned to Minas Tirith in splendor. Faramir surrendered the white rod of stewardship, and Gandalf placed the crown upon Aragorn's brow. The people of Gondor hailed him as Elessar, the Elf-stone, king of the reunited realm. Gandalf then led Aragorn to a mountain glade where a sapling of the white tree had taken root. "Behold the sign of your kingdom renewed," he said, and so the city bloomed once more. Soon Elrond, Galadriel, and Celeborn arrived, bringing with them Arwen Undomiel. On Midsummer's Day, beneath the white tree, Aragorn and Arwen were wed, the king and queen of the Fourth Age. Chapter 16. Many Partings. The great days of feasting passed, and the hobbits longed for home. Aragorn rode with them part of the way, for the fellowship would not yet be parted. Before they left, Arwen spoke softly to Frodo. She told him that she would remain in Middle-earth and forsake the undying lands. But she gave him a gift, her place upon the ship to the west, should his wounds and weariness ever grow too heavy to bear. Together the fellowship rode north to Rohan, where they buried King Theoden with honor in Edoras. There, Faramir and Éowyn announced their betrothal, and Éomer swore friendship to Gondor for all the days of his reign. Gimli and Legolas then fulfilled their promise, visiting together the glittering caves and the green depths of Fangorn Forest. On the road to Isengard, they found that Treebeard had released Saruman, judging him no longer dangerous. Yet when the company met the fallen wizard on the road, he was a pitiful beggar, bitter and spiteful. Merry, out of kindness, gave him a pouch of pipeweed, and Saruman cursed him for it. Thus, unrepentant, he passed into shadow. The fellowship came next to Rivendell, where they found Bilbo, now aged and forgetful, content to spend his days writing and dreaming. Frodo told him the tale of their journey, and Bilbo smiled faintly, saying that it was time for others to finish what he had begun. Before the hobbits departed, Elrond told Frodo that they would meet again, when autumn came in the Shire, and beside him, he said, would be Bilbo. Frodo kept those words in his heart, but told no one else. Chapter 17. Homeward Bound. When Gandalf and the hobbits reached Bree, they found the town quiet and fearful. The prancing pony still stood, though the streets were nearly empty. Balim and Butterbur welcomed them warmly, but with a worried heart, telling them of bandits and dark wanderers who had troubled the lands since the rangers vanished. He spoke of murders and burned farms, and of pipeweed gone missing from the South Farthing. "There's trouble in the Shire, mark my words," he said. But he brightened to see them armed and armoured, marvelling at how much the 4 small hobbits had changed. Gandalf assured him that a new king now ruled and that peace would return. When Butterbur heard that this king was none other than Strider the Ranger, he nearly dropped his tray in astonishment. The next morning, as they saddled their horses, Butterbur led forth a familiar friend, Bill the pony, hale and strong. Sam laughed aloud to see him again. They rode on through the wilds toward home. In the shadows of the old forest, Gandalf stopped his horse and turned aside. "I will leave you here," he said. "You no longer need my guidance. You are grown, all of you. Go now, and save your own land." And so the 4 hobbits rode on alone toward the Shire. Merry looked around at the quiet woods and said it felt as though the great adventure had been only a dream. But Frodo, gazing into the twilight, murmured softly, "Perhaps it is we who have awakened, and the Shire that dreams." Chapter 18. The Scouring of the Shire. When the 4 hobbits at last reached the borders of the Shire, they found a land they scarcely knew. A new gate barred the road, and a notice declared that no one might enter after sunset. The gatekeepers, hobbits themselves, knew them by sight, yet refused to open the way. So Merry and Pippin climbed the gate, opened it by force, and were met by a hulking man they knew too well, Bill Ferny of Bree. But the hobbits had changed. At the glint of their swords, Ferny fled into the night, only to be kicked once more by Bill the pony, and never seen again. At the gatehouse, they learned the grim tale. Lotho Sackville Baggins, calling himself chief, had taken control of the Shire. Ruffians from the south patrolled the roads, hoarding food and drink, burning firewood and forbidding pipeweed. The mills belched black smoke, and the clear streams ran foul. The Shire was under tyranny. Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin rode on toward Hobbiton, only to be stopped by a band of sheriffs claiming they were under arrest. But no threats could hold them now. The hobbits pressed on, hearts burning. Merry and Pippin decided that the time had come to rouse their people. They drove off a gang of ruffians with flashing blades and called the hobbits to arms. At Farmer Cotton's house, Sam found Rosie waiting and smiling through her worry. Cotton told them how Lotho had risen to power, selling pipeweed and land to strange men until even the mills and inns were no longer free. Worst of all, a new master had come among the ruffians, one they called Sharky. Lotho himself was seldom seen. Frodo begged that no hobbit blood be shed if it could be helped. But when the ruffians returned and drew weapons, the first arrow flew. So began the Battle of Bywater, the only battle ever fought in the Shire. Merry and Pippin led their people with courage and skill. When it was done, 70 of the enemy lay dead, and 19 hobbits beside them. The Shire was free again, though wounded. When the victors came at last to Bag End, Sam burst into tears. The party tree was gone, the garden torn up, the door broken. "This is worse than Mordor," he said. And within, in the ruined parlour, they found the author of the ruin, Saruman, the fallen wizard, now called Sharky. With cold malice, he confessed that he had ordered the destruction out of spite, to defile what the hobbits held dear. The crowd seethed, but Frodo stepped forward and forbade them to kill him. "Do not stain the Shire with his blood," he said. Saruman sneered and turned to leave, summoning his wretched servant Wormtongue. As they passed through the gate, Saruman mocked him, revealing that Wormtongue had murdered Lotho under his orders. Maddened by years of cruelty, Wormtongue struck, stabbing his master to death before falling beneath a hail of hobbit arrows. Saruman's body shriveled to dust, his spirit rising like smoke and vanishing on the wind. And in that moment, the evil that had touched the Shire was ended. Yet the scars upon the land and upon the hearts of its people would take long to heal. Chapter 19. The Grey Havens. In the months that followed, the hobbits set themselves to the work of healing. Prisoners were freed from the lockholes, and the ugly mills of Sharky's men were torn down. Sam went about planting trees where they had been cut, using the dust given him by Galadriel in Lothlorien. Wherever he sowed, new life sprang up swiftly until the Shire was greener than before. At Bag End, Frodo gave refuge to Lobelia Sackville Baggins, who returned the key with tearful apologies for her son's misdeeds. And in the field where the party tree had once stood, Sam planted the silver nut from Galadriel's gift. A Mallen tree, the only one of its kind in the Shire. Peace returned, yet Frodo seemed changed. He often sat quietly, his thoughts far away. When Sam looked upon him, he sometimes saw a shadow cross his face, as though he still felt the weight of the ring. On the anniversaries of his wounds, Frodo grew pale and restless. At last, Frodo invited Sam to live with him in Bag End. Sam told him of his love for Rosie Cotton, and Frodo smiled, saying that both would be welcome. They were wed soon after, and in time had a daughter, Eleanor, golden-haired like the flowers of Lorien. But Frodo's restlessness deepened. He showed Sam the red book in which he had written the story of their journey, save for one final chapter, which he left for Sam to finish. Then, one evening, he told Sam that he must go away. Together they rode west, meeting Galadriel, Elrond, and old Bilbo at the Grey Havens. There, on the silent shore, Gandalf awaited them, his work now ended. Upon his hand shone Narnia, the Ring of Fire, and with Elrond and Galadriel, he bore the last of the elven rings back to the west. Merry and Pippin came to bid farewell, and Frodo turned to Sam, eyes filled with peace. "You cannot always be torn in two," he said. "You have so much to enjoy, and to be, and to do." Then Frodo stepped aboard the white ship. As it sailed out upon the sea, he saw a far green country under a swift sunrise, and so he passed beyond the circles of the world. Sam, Merry, and Pippin rode home in silence. When Sam reached Bag End, Rosie met him at the door, Eleanor in her arms. He kissed them both and said simply, "Well, I'm back." Thank you for listening to The Return of the King, Book 3 of The Lord of the Rings. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment which tale you would like to hear next. Thanks again, and see you in the next one.